Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Nice to see so many of you here for our first of our conversation program. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm so happy that we've got 2 days of summer this year. It's lovely out there today. I hope you've had a nice a chance to get outside. It is gorgeous, so please get out there today. Later on, just to let you know a little bit more what we got going on at 2:30, we've got another conversation for you in here with John T. Warneken. He is the first amputee para to swim the channel between Scotland and Ireland. He's going to be talking a bit about that today at 2:30, and he's also got 3 Guinness World Records in ice swimming and channel swimming. So and he's a very inspirational speaker, so great. Not to be missed this afternoon. But first of all, a gentleman that I've had, I thought he was behind me, he's over there hiding in the dark, a gentleman I've sailed with before. He said that the Shamrock Tenors last night were a great warm-up to this event, because I believe he's going to do his best Irish dancing for us. No, he's not at all. He's a great observer of humanity, of human behavior, and with a passion for travel and the history of travel, and he's going to be talking a bit more about ocean travel now. Please welcome a great friend of Seabourn, the very lovely and debonair Andrew Johnson, everybody.
Thank you, James. Lovely and debonair. What can I say? The Shamrocks last night did a great performance. Of course they did. I'm sure you had a fabulous time enjoying them. But there is a theme that comes from that runs into my talk today. The leaving of Liverpool. That 15-year-old girl whose statue you'll see at the entrance to the port in Cove tomorrow. The first person to be processed through Ellis Island. These are stories of humanity. They're stories of anguish, some of them, and they develop into stories of great joy and exploration. And exploration is one of my great passions, as is the development of world trade and the movement of people. Now, let me be clear from the start. I am not an academic. So if you're expecting something that will lead to a university qualification, I'm not your man. I am a very successful international chief executive. I was the managing director of the British Automobile Association, and I was the president of the European Federation of Auto Clubs, the equivalent, in fact, the exact equivalent of the AAA of North America. And we worked very closely together on developing projects and developing market opportunities. So on to today's talk. Today, very few of us take a ship to get somewhere in a hurry, certainly not on a long journey like the transatlantic crossings. But for over a century, there was a prize called the Blue Ribbon for speed in the North Atlantic. And this is my subject today, a story of some of the people who crossed the Atlantic to make a better life for themselves, like those we heard about last night, and some of the great ships that competed for the fastest crossing. Now, several of you have been with me before, and it's nice to see you again. And if you have, you may remember that I have an interest in language, having worked in an office with 17 different languages, in a business with 24, language is an important part of who I am. And as a result, I get quite fascinated by people's use of, particularly of my language. So people send me photos of signs that they've seen. And this one was spotted in the north of England, actually very close to where Jamie comes from. Someone, I guess, either paid a lot of money or made a big mistake promoting the film Walking Dead right next to the local funeral parlour. It just amused me. And then there's this one. Now, I am all for inclusion, and I think it would be ridiculous not to help people with their mobility. But the idea that a pilot's lounge needs a braille sign just disturbs me a little bit. Anyway, back to my story. You will recognize this man, Elvis Presley. He was born on January the 8th in 1935. Now that's an important year in my story, and although I'm going to go back to come forward to that, Elvis is remembered in the port of Bremerhaven in Germany, because it was there that he disembarked his troop ship to fulfill his military service. And my story starts here for a couple of reasons. One is the Museum of German Emigration. Kathy and I have travelled, as you have, to many, many places, and in places like Halifax, Nova Scotia, and some of the ports that we're going to visit this week, there are some very good museums of emigration. The best that we've found is in Bremerhaven. And you are given the name of someone who has been an emigre, and you follow their story around as you move through the museum. It looks at the dreadful conditions of steerage class on some of those ships, the luxury of first class, and the intimidation of Ellis Island, which we heard about last night. If you want to check your own family history, you can do that. They have pretty good records. And they also look at the changes in Europe that have come about through immigration as well as emigration, and how it's enriched European society. Now, the stories of emigration include some pretty dreadful stories. In 1847 alone, more than 100,000 Irish people sailed to the Americas, and an estimated 1 in 5 died from disease and malnutrition on the journey. They were in overcrowded, poorly maintained, badly provisioned vessels, and they were known as coffin ships. Excuse me. They sailed from small, unregulated harbours in the west of Ireland in contravention of the appropriate safety requirements. And as I say, the mortality rates were awful. Fortunately, ship owners began to realise that human cargo was more valuable if they kept it alive. And so the race across the Atlantic became more about the wealthy passengers who would pay more for the speed, pay a premium for speed. So speed brings me to my second reason for mentioning 1935, because that was the year that Harold K. Hales, who was a British Member of Parliament and a shipping owner, established the Hales Trophy for Speed. Up to that point, there had been no formal trophy for people to win. So his trophy was presented to the fastest run across the Atlantic. Unfortunately, he died in a boating accident, slight irony, I guess, in the River Thames in 1942. So I want to tell the story of how the coffin ships of the potato famine led to more and more ships crossing the Atlantic, and how they came to compete for this magnificent trophy. Now, the term blue-ribboned actually comes from horse racing. A riband is an Old English term for a ribbon, and blue ribbons were given to the winners of various horse races. The term from Middle English. In terms of seafaring, it wasn't actually used until about 1910, and the race was really a series of unwritten rules. The criteria was the average speed rather than the passage time, and the blue ribbon accolade applied to the more difficult westbound route. The westbound route is more difficult because the trade winds blow clockwise in the North Atlantic, anti-clockwise in the South Atlantic, and in between we have the doldrums. So if you are traveling from North America to Europe, you're traveling with the wind behind you if you take the Grand Circle route. If you're traveling from Europe to North America, unless you go very far south, which really extends the journey enormously, you have to prepare for headwinds as well. 35 Atlantic liners have held the blue ribbon. 25 of them are British, 5 of them are German, 3 of them are American, and one each from Italy and France. And as you can see, even toys were made to mark these ocean liners. And toys that were played with by children rather than the rather beautiful models that we can buy in the shop on board here. Now, from the middle of the 19th century, a number of ships were built with quite substantial government military funding so that they would be able to have a dual purpose as troop carriers or even as fighting ships. Winston Churchill said that the Cunard Queens helped to shorten the Second World War by more than a year, simply because they were able to travel so fast, they were able to move so many people, and were able to commit through the slower moving German fleet. The SS United States was built for potential use as a troop ship, as well as service as a commercial liner, just like the Canberra and the Queens and the ships that sailed to the Falklands in 1982. Now, during this period, certain names stand out. The Mauretania, grand old ship, battled across the Atlantic for 23 years, and in that time, she didn't lose her blue ribbon to any other ship. There's the unsinkable Titanic, which you'll have opportunities to find out more about in both Cove and Belfast. She didn't have a chance, but she wasn't in the race for speed. There's the story of the Kronprinz Wilhelm's wartime dash into Hampton Roads. Each of these has had numerous theses written about them, deep and very interesting stories. So in 45 minutes, I can only scratch the surface, of course. So the Blue Ribbon was the prize for the fastest crossing of the North Atlantic between the Bishop Rock lightship. We will pass there, I'm guessing about 2 or 3 o'clock this afternoon, but you won't be able to see it, I think, but just off the Scilly Isles, off the far southwestern tip of Cornwall. So between the Bishop Rock light and the Ambrose light off New York Harbour. And as I said, until the 30s, the winner was the ship which averaged the highest rate of knots on the voyage. The purists have retained that principle. Hales tried to change it. There were lots of titles that were hotly disputed, and it was because of that that he decided to introduce his trophy and a blue ribbon pennant. Now, I think the captain mentioned yesterday that a knot, a nautical mile, is 1 minute of arc of latitude. 1 minute of arc from the north to the south pole. And that is the measure by which ship's speed and distance is recorded. I have to be honest, the benefits of the blue ribbon to a holder are questionable. There's the prestige value to the company. That was enormous. Passengers' bookings would increase because people at that time wanted to cross the pond as fast as they could, and the ships were the only way to do it. But there was also prestige being sought by governments who wanted their nationalities, their national ships, to be the fastest across. And so subsidies were introduced not only for military-enabled ships, but for standard passenger ships as well. 4 ships of the North German Lloyd Company, Norddeutsche Lloyd, ruled the Atlantic for 10 years, and they were all very heavily subsidized by the German government. But there were disadvantages too. The major was running those ships at full pelt inevitably damaged the engines. And the Kaiser Wilhelm, which I mentioned before, held the title in 1897, burnt 1 ton of coal for every hour of every knot of speed. So for every knot of speed, they burned 1 ton of coal. At a service speed of 22 knots, the fuel supply that had to be carried and was consumed was massive, and it impacts the number of passengers or the amount of cargo that a ship can carry as well, because it's adding weight to the vessel. This, by the way, is her first-class dining room, which was simply magnificent, really, really beautiful. So if you were traveling on the upper decks, there was some beautiful, really comfortable luxury. So then came oil burning engines, and that helped. The fuel was lighter. It was also easier to administer. And even that was pushing to make the ships actually profitable. You know, the Queen Elizabeth, so this is 1930s through to 60s, the Queen Elizabeth burnt 1,000 tons of fuel oil, per hour. So if you think about that, multiplied by a 4-day journey, it's just horrendous, really. The disadvantage of running a blue ribbon ship was the tremendous strain on the hull as well as the engines, and not many ships lasted long after they had lost their title. Operators had to face another challenge as the ships became larger, because the larger the ship, the larger the berth, and the deeper the passageway required for the ships to get into harbour. Frequently, the harbour entrances had to be dredged and widened, and both New York and Cherbourg had to build especially long piers to accommodate the Queen Mary and the Queen Elizabeth when they were introduced, so they could call there. So all these facts eventually led to the disappearance of the general liner, largely because these things came along, meaning that you could travel across the Atlantic in the 1950s. Even on turboprops, you could get across the Atlantic in hours rather than days. And of course, with the jetliner, it was an overnight experience. But let's go back to the 19th century and let's look at how this all began. The idea of building a transatlantic steamship company was mooted in 1832 by Junius Smith. He was an American lawyer turned a London merchant, and the idea came to him during a crossing which took 57 days. Not unusual in those days. Now, we cruise across the Atlantic in about 7 days. The Queen Mary II can do it in 4. So 57 days. And he decided that he needed to introduce larger, more powerful ships, and he's considered to be the father of the Atlantic liner, Junius Smith. He formed the British and American Steam Navigation Company. So about the same time, the Great Western Company, the Great Western Railway, which was building a line from London to Bristol and eventually beyond, their chief engineer, Isambard Kingdom Brunel, came up with the idea of extending the Great Western Railway by introducing ships from Bristol across the Atlantic. So you would book a ticket, effectively, from London Waterloo Station to the harbour in New York. So the next year, 1837, they established the Great Western Shipping Company. By 1838, only a year or so later, the Great Western was ready for sea. Smith's first ship was still without engines, so he was running a long way behind. And he decided, persuaded his fellow directors to charter a ship. They chartered this, the Sirius. And the Sirius left Cork, or Cove, where we will be tomorrow, 4 days before the Great Western departed Avonmouth, which is the port for Bristol in England. Sirius was so stretched that to complete the voyage, they had to burn wooden spars, the things that hold the ship together. And so when she actually arrived in New York, she was in a pretty ropey state. She just did it in 10 knots, but things developed, and the following year, the Great Western managed to knock her with a much faster speed. Sir Samuel Cunard was born in Halifax, Nova Scotia in 1787. His parents had fled there during the American Revolution. From the 1850s, there was a battle between Collins Line and Cunard. It lasted 8 years, and during that time, the record bounced between the two companies several times. Cunard broke the record in 1856 with the Persia and retained it with the Scotia in 1862. Scotia was the largest ship in the world at the time, 4,000 tons. This ship, for example, is 32,000 tons. The Ovation and Encore are 40,000 tons. And we consider, and Pursuit and Venture are 22,000 tons. So 5, 8, 10 times as big as these little things that were bouncing across the Atlantic then. Scotia had a paddle wheel and sails. It was made of iron, and it held the Blue Ribbon, well, on and off for 13 years. Lost it occasionally and won it back again. The next development in technology, next big development in technology, was the propeller. Officially known as a sailing steamer, the Britannic was launched in 1874 and still used sails to complement her steam power, but with a propeller as opposed to the wheels that Scotia had. In December 1875, she made a crossing at very nearly 16 knots, and we're doing probably around that sort of speed at the moment. But we're tootling along. We've got time. We don't have to rush because we don't have to be in Cove until tomorrow morning. That was running at full pelt. And she got the record, but at a cost of burning 100 tons of fuel a day. The Britannic and her sister ship, Germanic, continued. But as ships became more expensive, Thomas May, the founder of the White Star Line, decided to persuade the British Admiralty, the department responsible for the Navy, to invest in some ships that will be kept in constant readiness in the event of conflict, but will be used as passenger sailing vessels in the meantime. 1886, that idea was proposed, and Harland and Wolff were instructed to produce the finest ship afloat. And Teutonic, here, just under 10,000 gross tons, was the first armed cruiser built specifically for the British Admiralty. It was a costly business. Her maiden voyage was on the 7th of August, and she was joined in 1890 by her sister ship, the Majestic. These are names that reflect the perception that these were massive ships. There followed a series of intense rivalry between White Star and Inman Line, and in 1891, the city of New York raced across the Atlantic in one of the most famous contests of the Blue Ribbon. Cunard countered with two even faster ships, the Campania and the Lusania. That was in 1893. Next year, Lusania recorded a voyage of 21, very nearly 22 knots, which is as fast as we would expect to travel in a hurry in these ships. Inman became the American line. I've just lost my screen. Inman became the American line, and they introduced two additional express liners from American yards, but no attempt was made by them to better Cunard because they didn't feel they could do it. But Germany, meanwhile, was beginning to build up a fleet of mercantile and naval vessels to equal those of the British. And in 1897, the German liners swept all the opposition from the seas for the next 10 years. The ships grew, they expanded the fleet. The Bremerhaven North German Lloyd steamers, known as the Four Flyers, was joined by the Kronprinz Wilhelm. Now, she snatched the record in 1900 with a speed of very nearly 25 knots. But the most dramatic episode in the Kronprinz Wilhelm's life was in the 1914-1918 war. I mentioned it briefly earlier on. She was converted to a stalking cruiser and let loose on the North Atlantic. She sank some 60,000 tons of British shipping in a year. And after running out of supplies and taking shelter in Hampton Roads, she was requisitioned by the USA and eventually served as a US troop carrier. Thomas Ismay's White Star Line eventually, or gradually, was to become one of the most prominent shipping lines in the world. She was running passenger and cargo services around the British Empire and from Europe to the United States. The company retained a prominent hold on shipping markets around the globe, but fell into decline during the Great Depression, and ultimately a merger was forced upon them by the British government with Cunard. So Cunard White Star was brought into play. And of course, Cunard is now a part of the Carnival Corporation, as Seabourn is, and as a lasting reminder of Star Line, modern cruise ships use the term, modern Cunard ships rather, use the term White Star service to describe the level of customer care expected of the company. But not everyone stayed in the race. While many other shipping lines focused primarily on speed, White Star branded their services by focusing more on providing comfortable passages for both upper class and the immigrant classes below decks. White Star began its North Atlantic run between Liverpool and New York with nearly 6 identical ships. Did I say nearly 6? I mean 6 nearly identical ships. That's a rather different interpretation, isn't it? They were known as the Oceanic class. So there was the Oceanic, the Atlantic, the Baltic, the Republic, followed slightly later by the Celtic and the Adriatic. And it had been a long custom for shipping lines to have related names for their ships. And he chose IC as the ending of all of their ship names: Oceanic, Atlantic, Baltic, and so on, including the Titanic, which I'll come back to later if we have time. Since 1902, Cunard's been making plans for a pair of giant liners, which were to be equipped with more powerful reciprocating engines, which means they work better together. And they were driving triple screws, so 3 propellers, unheard of before. But the success of the new diesel turbine engines of the Parsons Company made them decide to test these 2 technologies, just as they'd done back in 1862. And so Cunard arranged for 2 ships to be built, the Coronia and the Carmania, and then Lusitania came along as the 3rd, and Lusitania was to be the winner. When World War I broke out, Lusitania, this was in 1914 of course, Lusitania was at sea. She arrived home safely and she was kept in her regular Liverpool and New York service during the war. But on the 7th of May 1915, Lusitania was torpedoed by a U-20 and sank within just 18 minutes. The commander of the U-boat, Kapitan Schweiger, was awarded a Medal of Honor for his heroic deed. But I think for the rest of us, the real reward was the decision by the United States to enter into the conflict. And with the loss of life on Lusitania in mind, of course, we should remember that not all passengers were travelling in the lap of luxury. Even with the coffin ships being back in history, immigration was a major motive force in the growth of the liners. While the wealthy travelled first or second class, poor immigrants were far less likely to be travelling in style. From their third class or steerage, bunk room accommodation, often single sex, so families would be separated from one another for the voyage, not always seeing each other because there would be male sections of the ships and female sections of the ships. You can imagine they were just ticking off the days until families might be reunited in the new land. The reality, of course, of arrival in the new land to all these dreams wasn't always what they would have hoped. Back to the race. This is a picture of the Bremen and the Europa in Bremerhaven. I mentioned Bremerhaven earlier on. This was in 1929, and these ships were built and designed specifically to take the Blue Ribbon back from the British. The sister ships were built in Hamburg, just close by, and they were to make their maiden voyages simultaneously. But a fire on board the Europa delayed her debut for nearly a year, and she took the baton shortly after she did enter service, though. The only blue ribbon winner operating from the Mediterranean is the Rex, which was an Italian ship, and she took the title from Europa in 1933 when she raced from Gibraltar to the Ambrose Light in 4 days, 13 hours and 58 minutes, at an average speed of just under 29 knots. And so we come to the Hales Trophy. As I say, there was no formal award up until this point, but the rules for the trophy didn't correspond to the accepted rules of the Blue Ribbon, because this could be awarded to any surface ship achieving the fastest speed in either direction. So it really changed the dynamics. There were other rule changes which complicated the situation. For example, even before the trophy was finished, Hales had made arrangements to present the trophy to the Rex, the Italian ship I've just mentioned. But in the meantime, the Normandy, the French ship, took the record, and so Hales changed the rules so that a winner had to give other people, a winner would retain their trophy for 3 months if someone else beat them. So before the successor could claim the trophy, they had to wait for 3 months. Now this is the main dining room on the SS Normandy, and it had to be one of the most beautiful ships sailing the Atlantic. It won the award in 1935, but it lost it a year later to the Queen Mary at very nearly 31 knots. 1 year later, Normandy regained it again with a 31 knot speed and lost it again only 4 months later, this time again to the Queen Mary, but this time for good. She was later taken over by the American military to become the troop ship Lafayette, but was destroyed in a fire in New York in 1942. Queen Mary became the new ruler of the North Atlantic, and in 1938 took the title with a speed of very nearly 32 knots. Now, depression had put construction of the Queen Mary on hold for 3 years. It took a £9.5 million subsidy, a massive amount of money, all those years ago, and the forced merger of Cunard and White Star to bring her to service. At 81,000 tons and 1,000 foot long, Queen Mary was the largest and longest ship ever launched, and she eventually entered service after undertaking a round Britain parade almost to show herself off to the nation, which I guess is fair, as the nation had paid a very large chunk towards it. During World War II, thanks to their high speed, the Queens, the Queen Mary and the Queen Elizabeth, were generally allowed to travel across the Atlantic without a warship escort, as nothing afloat could have caught them. But in 1942, the Queen Mary was coming down the west coast of Scotland, where we'll be in a few days' time, and she encountered a convoy with the escort vessel HMS Curacao in attendance. The, I'm going to say accepted rule, the instruction was that at the time convoys must zigzag their journeys to make them more difficult to attack. Each captain, the captain of the Curacao and the captain of the Queen Mary, had a different interpretation of the rules of the sea. Each of them believed that his ship had the right of way, and in the confusion, the Queen's bows sliced straight through the Curacao without the slightest jolt being felt on board the Queen Mary. She steamed on. She was forbidden to stop for any reason at all, and only a handful of the shattered Curaçao's staff and crew survived those icy waters. Those who witnessed the collision were sworn to secrecy due to national security concerns. The Queen Mary's crew were later exonerated but in an inquiry, but the Admiralty never accepted that conclusion. I guess we'll never know. The United States is described as the last great superspeed liner. I'm not sure that's entirely true, and I think I'll explain why. She took the record from the Queen Mary in 1952 with a record crossing of 3 days, 10 hours and 40 minutes, an average speed of very nearly 36 knots. Kathy and I crossed on the Queen Mary 2 in January a few years ago in horrendous snowstorms. It really was an experience. We loved it, but an experience. And we crossed at a recent record speed of 27 knots. That's 7.5 knots slower than the United States. But it's worth noting, the United States and the Queen Mary could both reverse faster than most modern cruise ships can travel forward. The design of the propeller on the United States remained classified for decades. She was heavily subsidized by the US government, and although outwardly a luxury liner, the United States' speed potential is greater than she's ever really shown. She's basically an extremely fast government personnel transport ship. By the time the United States hit the water for the first time, travelers of the 50s were starting to find other ways to make their journeys with the introduction of faster aircraft, and then, of course, the introduction of jet engines. She completed her last voyage, voyage number 400, on November the 7th in 1969. And when she arrived in New York, ever since she's had a pretty checkered career, being laid up in Virginia, towed over to Europe and back, then to Philadelphia, being purchased by and then from NCL, that time by the United States Conservancy. That was in 2009. There have been multiple attempts to restore her, the latest just a few years ago. But she is now in Florida, and the project has her sunk to form diving reefs off the Keys. The liners mark an end of a period of great glamour. Bob Hope and his family emigrated to the United States from England. They travelled in steerage class aboard the SS Philadelphia. They passed through Ellis Island, just like that 15-year-old girl we heard about last night. And that was on March the 30th in 1908. So they may have left Britain in poverty in search of a new life, but Bob Hope was to continue to use the ocean liners, only now up in the first-class accommodation as he developed his career. And the ocean liners formed an important point in the important part in the romance of Prince Rainier and Grace Kelly before they were married. At the heyday of the mid-50s, many ships a day left New York alone for Europe. There were large numbers of vessels sailing across the Pacific and from Europe, especially the UK, to the colonies of India and Africa, to Australia, to New Zealand. But of course, the introduction of airliners changed things. The early attempts to create the cruising experience or the liner experience in the air were really very ambitious. You will remember the Pan Am Clipper class. Well, it comes from the days when they were flying Clipper aircraft. These were a flying liner. They had bedrooms, bathrooms, lounges, restaurants. The Pan Am Clippers were able to use seaport facilities to land and to moor, a bit like the modern seaplanes, the little ones you see in places like Vancouver and Sydney and others. I suppose in-flight walk-up bars and massages and so on Dreamliners and A380s are an attempt to humanize air travel, but they don't get anywhere near this. So let's look at two very famous ships that didn't make it. The Olympic was the largest ship in the world at her launching in 1910. She weighed 45,000 tons, built by Harland and Wolff in Belfast for the White Star Line. And in Belfast, you will still see the H&W cranes and derricks at the harbour because they are still building ships there to this day. From keel to the bridge, she stood 105 feet high. She had 4 funnels, which rose another 70 feet above that, designed for a speed of 21 knots, not intended to be a record breaker. But she was intended to be an unashamedly luxurious Atlantic liner. Having completed her fitting out, she was in the basin as Titanic was launched on the 31st of May in 1911. The two largest ships in the world were side by side for a short time before Olympic left for Liverpool. Her maiden voyage was on the 14th of June, and she made the crossing at an average speed of 21.17 knots, relatively slow. Although not a blue ribbon speed queen, we should come back to the story of the Titanic. Walter Lloyd wrote, you see here, "The Titanic has cast a spell on all who built and sailed in her. So much so that as the years go by, she grows even more fabulous." Titanic was launched on the 31st of May 1911 as the second of the big 4 planned by Bruce Ismay, the son of the founder of White Star. There were to be the Olympic, the Titanic, the Britannic, not to be confused with that one I showed you earlier on, and the Gigantic, although the Gigantic never materialized. And a year later, on the 10th of April 1912, Titanic was at her berth in Southampton, ready to set sail on her maiden voyage. She had a registered tonnage about 1,000 tons more than the Olympic. Now, there is a persistent rumour that Titanic was going fast to try to break the record. That cannot be true. It wasn't designed to do that. So it wasn't excessive speed for that reason that caused her to hit that iceberg. But experts believe that is profoundly untrue. Tomorrow we are in Cove, and alongside where we dock in the old maritime station, there is a really nice exhibition, a small museum about immigration, which is well worth a visit. The boys last night mentioned the statue outside, and a little bit beyond that, on the right-hand side, is a small museum about the Titanic. This is the Titanic Museum in Belfast, which is a much grander affair. And if you have nothing else planned in Belfast, and there is plenty to do from Belfast, if you have nothing else planned, this is well worth a visit. As you probably know, Titanic had a double keel to ensure against any occurrences. She had watertight bulkheads along the length of her keel, forming buoyancy compartments. Titanic, in theory, could float with up to 4 of these compartments flooded. But of course, we know that she sank, and she sank because those bulkheads were not high enough, and water reached higher decks. I think we understand better now. Lots of lessons were learnt, of course. But we also understand the extreme reflection on society in the class system on board, typical of liners of the time. I mentioned the Queen Mary 2. She and even her predecessor, the QE2, could both make a pretty good fist of a stab at the blue ribbon. But today, speed is not the main issue. Most certainly, it's not the important topic. I believe, we're told that the United States was the last great ocean liner. I believe this is the last great ocean liner. She is built as a liner. She is built for the transatlantic swells and storms. She is quite a magnificent vessel of that size. I need to wind up, and I need to make this room available for other things. But Kathy and I are around. Kathy is sitting there in a very subtle, understated dress this morning. She and I work together on the research for these talks, and we're both delighted, more than happy, to talk with you, to meet with you, to follow up any questions. And I will be back tomorrow evening at about 5:30, cocktail hour, when I'm going to talk about the impact of the Industrial Revolution on Britain. We're going to some very important points in that story. Belfast was a major shipping yard, shipping town, a lot more than one yard. Newcastle, the same applies, and the areas around Tyneside and Teesside, that part of northeast England. Glasgow we don't go to, but we sail past, also major shipping area. Liverpool we sail past, but major port. Newcastle was also a very important point in the story of coal, as is Fishguard, where we will be in a couple of days' time. For now, please enjoy the cruise. Come back this afternoon for Jonty's talk, and we look forward to seeing a lot more of you. Thank you very much.